You wake up, glance at your dashboard, and your heartbeat drops. Yesterday, 260 miles. This morning, 210. Same battery, same charge. The car sat in your driveway all night and somehow lost 50 miles. Your first thought is the same one every EV owner has in that moment. The battery is dying. It isn't. And what's actually happening is far more interesting. Here's the thing most EV owners don't realize on day one. That number on your dashboard is not a measurement, it's a prediction. Your car doesn't have a precise fuel gauge, the way a gas car does. It has an estimator, a system that looks at your recent driving patterns, the current temperature, your HVAC usage, and your battery state of charge, and a dozen other inputs, and then makes its best guess about how far you can go. Change any of those inputs, and the estimate changes with them. Owners have started calling it the guess-o-meter, and it's a fair nickname. The displayed range is not a fixed number sitting on the battery waiting to be spent. It's a living calculation that gets revised constantly based on what the car is seeing right now. So when you wake up with 210 miles instead of 260, the battery didn't lose 50 miles of energy overnight. The car's prediction simply shifted because the conditions it's measuring changed. Temperature dropped, the math updated, the number moved. That's the core of it, but there's more going on underneath. And understanding each layer will completely change how you respond the next time it happens. Why it looks like battery damage, but almost never is. The reason this confuses so many owners is that the drop feels permanent. You're not driving differently. You didn't do anything wrong. And yet the number is just lower, stubbornly, consistently lower. So the brain goes straight to the worst case explanation. The battery degraded, something broke. The range is gone for good. Here's the reality check. Across large real-world datasets covering tens of thousands of EVs, modern battery packs lose roughly 2 to 3% of their capacity per year under normal use. Fleet data from Polestar and Tesla vehicles driven hard under daily rideshare conditions, not gentle consumer use, but full commercial mileage, showed average battery health sitting around 94 to 95% even at high mileage. Independent research from Geotab analyzing over 5,000 EVs across 1.5 million vehicle days puts average annual degradation at approximately 1.8% per year. Real battery degradation doesn't drop 50 miles overnight. It shaves off a few miles per year, the kind of gradual change you'd barely notice without looking back at old data. A sudden, sharp swing in displayed range, especially one that appeared while the car was parked doing absolutely nothing, is almost never actually capacity loss. It's the estimator responding to something it sees differently this morning than it did last night. The distinction matters enormously because the reaction to each scenario is completely different. One calls for patience and understanding, the other calls for a service appointment. Knowing which one you're dealing with saves you unnecessary stress and unnecessary repair bills. The real reason temperature is running the show. The single most common cause of overnight range drop is temperature, and it's a bigger effect than most people expect. Lithium-ion chemistry slows down in the cold. Internal resistance inside the battery cells increases, which means less usable energy is available, and the car didn't deliver power as efficiently. At 20 degrees Fahrenheit, a battery may only be able to deliver around 60% of the power it could at a comfortable 70 degrees. The electrolyte inside the cells becomes more viscous, the ions move slower, and the whole system becomes less willing to cooperate. Here's what makes this hit harder than it sounds. Cold air is also denser, which increases aerodynamic drag. Cold tires run at higher rolling resistance, and unlike a gas car that scavenges free heat from engine waste, your EV has to generate cabin heat directly from the battery. Running the heater at full output can consume 3 to 5 kilowatts continuously. On a highway drive, that can represent 15 to 20% of your total engine consumption before you've even accounted for moving the car. The estimator knows all of this. When temperatures drop overnight, it adjusts the prediction to reflect how the battery is actually performing in those conditions. That's why you see a lower number in the morning. The car isn't broken. It's being honest about the environment it's sitting in. The good news? This loss is temporary. As the battery warms up through driving, the estimate climbs back toward normal. On a mild day after a cold start, many owners report that the projected range actually ticks upward during the first 10 to 15 minutes of driving. Not because energy is being added, but because the system recalculates as the pack reaches its efficient operating temperature. Park in a garage, use preconditioning while the car is still plugged in to warm the battery on grid power before you leave. and the impact shrinks considerably. Real-world data is consistent here. EVs typically see 20 to 40% less range in harsh winter conditions. Short cold weather trips where the battery never warms up show the worst numbers. Moderate temperature highway driving might only see a 15% loss. These are not signs of failure, they're signs of physics. The battery management system is doing its job. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button. It takes 2 seconds and it helps us keep making content like this. Now here's another layer to this story that rarely gets explained: your battery management system. Every modern EV has one. The BMS is the invisible manager running underneath everything, constantly monitoring cell temperatures, voltage levels, state of charge, and long-term health. Its entire job is to keep the battery safe and extend its life. And here's where it can look alarming without actually being alarming. The BMS adjusts usable capacity based on conditions. In extreme cold, it may limit how much of the battery's stored energy is actually accessible. In high heat, it might do the same to prevent thermal stress. It can also restrict performance temporarily, reducing maximum output, slowing regenerative braking, or narrowing the effective charge window. All of this looks like range loss. None of it is permanent damage. The BMS is also what runs recalibration cycles. After a deep discharge or after a full slow charge to 100%, the system resurveys the pack and updates its estimate of the battery's health. Sometimes that recalibration makes the displayed range look worse, sometimes better, but it's the system becoming more accurate, not the battery deteriorating. Software updates can trigger the same behavior. A quiet over-the-air update can change the algorithm that calculates range, sometimes making the estimate more conservative, sometimes more honest. Owners wake up to 230 miles where 250 used to be and assume the worst. Often the car simply got better at telling the truth. Other reasons range drops that have nothing to do with the battery. Temperature and BMS behavior cover most cases, but here's a short list of other culprits worth knowing. Tire pressure is one of the most overlooked. Cold weather drops tire pressure. For every 10 degrees Fahrenheit of temperature drop, you lose 1 psi. Run 8 psi below spec, and rolling resistance climbs enough to noticeably drag down your range estimate. Check your pressures on a cold morning after temperatures have shifted, and you'll often find them lower than the door jamb recommends. Driving style changes are another. You spent last week on smooth suburban errands at 35 miles per hour, and this week you've been commuting on the interstate at 75 miles per hour. The estimator will revise downward fast. Aerodynamic drag increases the square of speed. Going from 65 to 80 miles per hour is not a minor adjustment. It's a significant efficiency penalty. HVAC usage hits harder than most people realize. Resistive cabin heat is the biggest power consumer in cold weather outside of actually moving the car. If you recently started blasting heat every morning, that's not a battery problem. That's the car doing exactly what you asked. Parked battery drain is real, but usually small. Certain features, Sentry mode, always-on connectivity, pre-warming systems, consume power while the car sits. Over a very cold night, this can add up enough to move the estimate. And if you recently added roof boxes, bike racks, or winter tires with deeper tread, those aerodynamic and rolling resistance penalties will show up in the range estimate immediately. When it's actually real degradation and how to tell the difference. Temporary range drops are normal. Permanent ones are a different conversation. The way you tell them apart is simple. Wait for conditions to normalize. Then look at whether the range came back. If temperatures warmed up, you went back to your usual driving patterns, and your range estimate returned to where it used to be, that was a temporary conditional drop. Normal, expected, nothing to worry about. If the range stayed low across multiple seasons, across different weather conditions, and across different driving styles, that points to genuine capacity loss. Real degradation doesn't hide. It shows up consistently regardless of temperature or driving behavior. Other signs of actual battery issues. The car takes noticeably longer to charge than it used to. Power output feels reduced. You're seeing error messages or battery health warnings. Fast charging behavior changed, slower speeds, lower acceptance rates, unusual cutoffs. In those cases, a professional battery health assessment is worth scheduling. Diagnostic tools measure voltage across individual cells, current flow, temperature response, and state of health, not just what the dash shows. That's the difference between knowing and guessing. What you should actually do. The practical checklist here is short, and most of it costs nothing. Check the temperature first. If overnight temperatures drop significantly, that's your answer before you even start the car. Look at your recent driving. New routes, higher speeds, more highway miles, or more HVAC use will all move the estimate downward. It's the estimator following the math, not the battery failing. Check tire pressure. Cold morning, pressure likely dropped. Set it to the door jam spec with cold tires and see if range estimates shift after a drive. Monitor across a season. If this is your first cold snap with the car, watch what happens as temperatures rise. For most owners, the range estimate climbs back to where it was. That's your confirmation the battery is fine. Use preconditioning while plugged in. Warming the battery and cabin before you leave means the car starts from an efficient temperature instead of spending the first miles getting warm. If the loss persists through multiple seasons with no correlation to conditions, then book a diagnostic. But that scenario is far less common than social media would have you believe. The real takeaway: modern EV batteries are not fragile. They don't drop 50 miles of range because of a bad night. Real degradation is slow, gradual, and measured in single-digit percentages per year across years of use, not in dramatic overnight swings. What you saw this morning was almost certainly the car's prediction engine adjusting to temperature, driving history, or system behavior. The battery woke up the same way it went to sleep. The displayed range is not a fact, it's an estimate. And estimates respond to the world around them. Once you understand that distinction, the anxiety disappears. You stop blaming the battery for every cold morning and start reading the actual signals your car is sending. Check the conditions, monitor the patterns, and trust that modern battery engineering is far more robust than the forums suggest. Drop a comment below. What was the biggest overnight range drop you've ever seen on your EV, and what turned out to be the cause? Subscribe for more EV content that cuts through the noise and gets straight to what actually matters.